Thank you for choosing to view this presentation for the 2025 International Symposium on Autoethnography and Narrative. This presentation is Critical Adventures of a Misbehaving Progressive Teacher, and my name is Craig Wood. I was born on the traditional lands of the Kaurna peoples, and my childhood weekends and school holidays were played on these lands and in these waters of the Ngajeri peoples, about halfway along the southern shores of the continent we now call Australia. Today, I live and work on the lands of the Yagara and Turrbal peoples, about halfway along the eastern coastline of the continent. I pay my respect to elders past and present for their continued custodianship of the lands and the songlines of this continent. I recognise that beneath the post-invasion constructions of bricks and mortar, steel, concrete and glass is, was and always will be Aboriginal land. I thank all First Nations peoples who are viewing this presentation and joining this conference session, and I recognise the generosity and patience of many First Nations friends and colleagues who have shared breath with this non-Indigenous body. I recognise this image is from the traditional lands and waterways of the Ngajeri peoples, and the image itself is sourced from the Murray-Darling Basin Authority. My research interests and this presentation include delving into relational spaces and attempting to navigate complex teacher-student dynamics that, as shaped by identities, are performed in a community of forever shifting rapports and frictions and collectively yield to or resist wider socio-political contexts. This presentation is drawn from my work in The Crystallising Teacher, published by Palgrave Macmillan. The Crystallising Teacher is a process of professional development that looks both inwards at the teacher as a person and outwards at their place in the wider socio-political world. This is a process of professional development that gives agency to teachers, which is so often eroded by contemporary models of neo-managerialism that make judgments based on decontextualised, formulaic templates and proficiency scales. The Crystallising Teacher restores teacher voice, develops rich understandings of professional praxis. It pursues transformations of self and calls to others to undertake solidarity work that enlivens hope. The Crystallising Teacher is, as Paulo Freire says, an intervention in which I educate and educate myself. By adopting Freirean notions of praxis and the dual positions of teacher and researcher, I have looked inwards and asked questions about factors that shape my personal identity. I've also looked outwards, where I've noticed and taken cognizance of socio-political forces that influence the field of education. My educating self emerges from looking inwards at those constructions of personal identity and building awareness of complexities of the professional, relational space. I look outward and I see how the professional shapes and is shaped by the political field of education. This is the work of Elizabeth McKinlay of disentangling personal, professional, political, pedagogical identities. My questioning of self also supports my educating others, and it becomes a call to progressive teachers to embrace risk and freedom and to struggle and resist against unjust structures. This inwards looking at the personal and professional, as well as the outwards looking at the wider socio-political, are both elements that I present in a letter to Paulo Freire. I'm writing back to Freire, across oceans of time and place, and in response to his letters in Teachers as Cultural Workers and Pedagogy of Indignation. The letter begins on the lands of the Ngajeri peoples, where, as a boy, whiteness was imprinted on my consciousness. Dear Paulo, I've been seeing a vision. I feel like I'm standing on a plateau. To the north, a river drifts despite being poked and pierced by numerous small wooden jetties. I sense there are deep currents flowing beneath the surface. Pelicans stand on the jetty's posts, and just beneath the birds there are signs on the posts, but I can't read the signs. To the south, there is open ocean. Well, from a wide angle it looks beautiful, but as I look more closely, I see the ferocity of the wind and the waves. It's brutal. From both directions, sound waves reverberate through my body. Across the river, a breeze dances over the flow of water, pausing to clang-a-chang and chime amongst the masts of boats and their fly cables. But from the south, whipped up over the ocean, winds howl across the crests of crashing waves which collide in chaos and plunge their spume and spray into the coast. The ocean's encroachment on the beach forces me to retreat further north along the river. Paulo, I know that you would say my vision represents the potential for a great adventure, that this is a relational space where there is potential to learn deeper understandings of self from the deep currents beneath the river's surface. I know you would tell me, while I might not be able to read those signs, that I can and I must make myself the text that I study. Similarly, the ferocious and chaotic ocean waves offer the potential to learn more about the socio-political context of our work as teachers. I know that navigating the adventures of this relational space in this complex world is a hard but necessary undertaking because it's personally confronting and politically challenging. I know that navigating the teacher-student professional space is complex business. Swirling around the currents beneath the river's surface are parts of my identity. It also occurs to me that the sounds of the breeze, from both directions, could be remembrance and re-remembrance of voices of students I have taught. If I could read the signs and understand my identity, I might increase my capacity to understand myself and then understand my biases in the processes I use when I hear students' voices. Of course, all the students have their own unique identity, which accounts for the breeze seemingly blowing from multiple directions. And understanding those student-student relational spaces further complicates this work, but it simultaneously enhances the adventure. In my vision, the brutality of the ocean is encroaching on the plateau. It occurs to me that this brutality threatens to overrun our professional and relational space, where my teacher-student relationships and the multiple versions of student-student relationships are being performed. We are at risk of being overwhelmed and subsumed by the ferocity of the ocean. We're at risk of immobilizing to unjust and adapting to unjust realities. But a misbehaving progressive teacher might offer hope. By assuming responsibility to be a critical activist, enacting pedagogies of hope and of indignation, and then teaching as an act of solidarity within classroom relationships. Working in solidarity offers hope for our learning community. Standing united makes us less vulnerable to being blown over by the howling winds, and if the waves knock one of us down, there'll be folk amongst us to lift us back up. As I educate myself, I see through the metaphor of this vision, and I represent my new learnings in this figure, which represents my crystallizing conscientização. Paulo. As you say, it is because we can transform the world that we are with it and with others. I am both in the world and with the world, and this figure is a representation of complex student-teacher relationships that are shaped by identities, are performed in a wider socio-political context. And this relational space, it can be likened to your notion of dialogue as an encounter between humans, and that is mediated by the world in order to name the world. My critical awareness of the personal and professional space emerges from my crystallizing conscientização. This process has educated me to understand how the wider socio-political frame shapes my identity from personal experiences of inheritance and acquisition of whiteness, and which are replicated through school curriculum. The figure also considers identity as a filter that can distort intended teacher actions which are invested into the teacher-student professional relationship. Whiteness, imprinted on my consciousness since before I was born, becomes an identity filter, and it disrupts my intention to enact critical pedagogies of hope and change-making. Having educated myself, and having taken the personal, professional and moral responsibility to disrupt whiteness, I now suggest the professional and pedagogical spaces do not have to be subordinate to the wider socio-political frame. Rather, a misbehaving and progressive teacher can have agency to undertake solidarity work in classrooms, to resist wider socio-political forces of hegemony in acts of resistance and in pursuit of radical, transformational and utopian hope. Paulo, with this understanding I agree with you. The teacher who is critically aware of the political that governs their relationship with their students will be more adept at deconstructing narratives and counter-narratives that are replicated or resisted in classrooms. And to that end, the misbehaving teacher must listen, observe, and undertake respectful inquiry to deepen understandings of the professional space. The appreciation for the multiple layers of complexities that influence this professional space must be achieved before the teacher-student relationship can bloom, and it is then that the adventure truly begins. In conscientization, the crystallizing teacher.